Hello students, welcome to Recitals in-Depth. Herein we will cover the Defense and Security section of the magazine for the month April 2024. The broader themes under which the topics that we are going to discuss will fall are cybersecurity, defense and infrastructure. So in the topic regarding Apple's mercenary spyware alert, recently the Apple have announced to its users that a potential spyware might be attacking their devices, which can lead to privacy breaches, data losses, etc. Now, this is not the first time that the Apple have announced such kind of alert for its user. Earlier also, Apple have announced the alerts, but in that particular moment, Apple told the users that state-sponsored attack might be happening. Now, the moment state-sponsored attacks are mentioned, and it is also mentioned that you are attacked for what you are doing and whom you are, it is because of which you are attacked, then it leads to questions regarding democracy, etc. Because in democratic countries, it is possible that certain spywares are used by the parties in power to actually take or steal the information from the opponents. Now, since earlier alerts were in this line, that's why it was a lot of controversy. So this time Apple have not mentioned that it is either state-sponsored attack or not, right? So simply Apple has announced that there is potential that a severe harm regarding the privacy might be on the cards with respect to your device. Now, what we have to understand here, since it is related to the cyber security, is that we will understand the important things that are involved in this issue, and then we will go into the cyber security side of it. Okay, so first of all, let us understand the terms that are commonly in use regarding this topic. Number one is malware. This is the term which we will often encounter in the news. Malware basically means malicious software. Now, this is an umbrella term of various kind of malicious softwares, right? Which can include virus, Trojan horse, ransomware, spyware. Okay, so as we can see, spyware is one of the class of malware, right? And the purpose of spyware is to basically steal the information from the device that it is targeting or attacking, right? So stealing the information from, let's say they can copy the messages, text messages, they can open or record the phone calls, they can open the video cameras and make the videos without our knowledge, right? So it can actually snoop into our devices and can lead to data losses as well as the breach of privacy. Okay, so it is this particular thing that is the area of concern for the Apple's alert. Okay, now here the particular spyware that is in question is Pegasus. Okay, now this is a spyware which is the most advanced spyware ever known to humanity, and this is built by an Israeli firm. It's a private Israeli firm called NSO. Now, understand some important technicalities about it. Now, the earliest version of Pegasus, which was known by the year 2016, was the one which would target the personal through a process called spear phishing. Now, this spear phishing is nothing just a method to infect a device. Under this, a email or SMS will be sent to the target device, and this will carry a malicious link. This will carry a malicious link, and the person will be tricked to basically click on this link. So it will not activate without our knowledge. It will require our consent in the form of clicking, right? So it will require our consent. Now, this new type of spyware, which is the most advanced version of this Pegasus, is basically known by what is called zero click. Now, it doesn't require our explicit consent. Even a simple WhatsApp call can come to you, which you don't even have to pick, and the code will be installed in your device. Okay, so even without our consent, it can infect our device. That's an important thing. Now, how it can do this? How it can infect without our consent? This is something called by exploiting the 0-day vulnerability. 0-day vulnerability. What does this mean? See, operating systems carry some defects which is not known even to the manufacturers. They might automatically carry certain bugs, right? And it is by exploiting those defects, those errors, or the bugs present already in the operating system, that this particular Pegasus spyware will be able to attack the device, right? So this is what 0-day vulnerability is all about, right? So that's all about the Pegasus spyware that is in question. Now we'll come to the larger question of the theme, which is the cyber security. Okay. Now, cyber security, if we see, it has to be about two things. Number one is to keep your system, your infrastructure secure. So this is basically a reactive side of it. That means somebody is trying to attack the device, and you have to have the systems in place to secure yourself, to keep yourself secure, right? Other thing is that there are a lot of criminal activities that are happening in the cyberspace, right? Drug trafficking is one of the criminal activity which can happen utilizing the cyberspace, such as darknet. Arms trafficking can happen utilizing the cyberspace, such as darknet. Simply, the money laundering can also happen, right? So it is also about developing the capabilities to actually check, capabilities to actually identify that the cyberspace is not abused or misused, right? So these are the two things that we have to learn in terms of cyber security, right? Now, normally we would categorize cyber security into non-traditional, traditional security threat. Non-traditional security threat. The reason is this, that it is normally perpetrated by the non-state actors. In traditional threat, It is direct and active involvement of state actors, right? And its impact is directly being borne by the ordinary human being, right? Its living, quality of life, etc., or its well-being, we will say, well-being might be directly affected. It might not directly target the state's authority, or sovereignty. Right? But there are also elements regarding traditional security threat in this, because it is not always the state actors that perpetrates it, right? Non-state actors that perpetrates it. It can also be done by the state actors, right? So let's take an example, right? During the Galwan clash, right, we have seen just after that lot of critical infrastructure such as power distribution system of India was targeted by the China-based hackers. So it was basically an attack which can be possibly by the state actors, right? So China-based hackers basically tried to compromise our power distribution system so that we will be coerced into submitting to their will, right? So it was directly challenging the authority of Indian state, right? Okay. Now, it can also have larger security implications. For example, it can compromise our defense system, right? So let's take an example. That certain ransomware attacks happened on Boeing, right? Now, Boeing is the one defense-related firm which is supplying components and aircraft to various countries in the world, right? So it was possible that the data breach that it suffered could have been utilized by the adversary, right? So it can compromise the security of any country. So similarly, the private defense firm, the public sector defense units that the India have can also be targeted. Its data can also be stolen, right? So this is a direct security threat for us. Now, it is not just that the defense, security, critical infrastructure, etc. can be targeted. Now, even the big corporates can be targeted. Big corporates, and most important thing is that it can directly question and challenge India's economic security, right? Economic security, how? See, if a private firm is targeted, then biggest problem is that it will not disclose that it is targeted. If a ransomware attack is there, they will not disclose it to the public. Why? They will not report it to the public authorities, because they fear that if it comes out in the public, there will be face loss and there can be devaluation of their stock prices, right? So they hide it, right? And if it comes out in public, it can lead to massive stock price evaluation, re-evaluation, right? Revaluation can happen, and this can create an economic shock. For example, let's take an example of a financial firm, right? A bank. If a bank can collapse, it can have a cascading impact on the entire economy of a country. So it is a direct threat to the economic security also, right? Now, drug trafficking. As we know, India is sitting or squeezed between the golden crescent, right, and golden triangle, right? Here we have country Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, which can, from where lot of drugs is coming into the eastern India, right? Then here we have Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, right? So it is spreading the drug targeting the western India, right? So it is in this sense that our internal security is threatened because drug trafficker uses cyberspace to conduct lot of their activities, right? So therefore, it is the other side of the cyber security that we have to create the defenses, not just by having the robust cyber security infrastructure to counter or to make sure that there is no cyber attack on us, but also to make sure that we are able to penetrate this dark web and therefore bust the drug trafficking networks, right? So it is this two-way capabilities that is something that is required to tackle this problem of cyber security in India. So in this topic, we will be seeing the importance of Ladakh from the geostrategic point of view. Various locations in the Ladakh are very, very strategically important for India. And it is because of this, the tussle between India, Pakistan and China is going. And it is in this context that we have to see the Galwan clashes between India and China and the kind of restructuring that the Chinese military is doing, especially with respect to Eastern Ladakh, by deploying more than 60,000 military personnel across the LAC, right? And this is basically from Demchok up to the Depsang plains. Now, as a response to this Chinese aggression and Chinese military deployment in the LAC, Indian military is also going for the restructuring. And it is in this context, a new army division with a special focus on Eastern Ladakh has to be seen. Okay, so now, we are in the process of creating a new army division which might be called the 72 division. Now, first of all, we have to understand that in the Indian army there are 4 strike corps, right? So one is Mathura based Corps 1, Corps 2 Ambala based, then 21 Corps which is Bhopal based, and then 17 MSC in Pangad. MSC means Mountain Strike Corps. Out of these strike corps, this 17 Mountain Strike Corps is basically focused towards China, right? But until 2021, these first 3 corps were all focused towards Pakistan, right? Now, because of the Chinese deployment, the ground realities there have changed. As a response to it, now India has also realigned this strategy by making Mathura based Corps 1 also focusing the Chinese mountains, right? So now instead of 1 mountain strike corps, we have 2 strike corps which are focusing for China, right? Earlier 3 were for Pakistan, 1 was for China. All right. Now, before we move into the strategic importance of various locations such as Siachen Glacier, Y Junction, Daulat Beg, Oldie, Karakoram Pass, etc., we have to go into the history. Why? Because it is going to be the 40 years of India's Operation Meghdoot, right? So, Operation Meghdoot was basically done in order to capture the Siachen Glacier by the Indian Army. It was done in a response because India anticipated that Pakistan is also in the process of occupying the Saltoro Ridge and maybe Siachen Glacier. We had a credible evidence or intelligence about it, and the operation that the Pakistan named was likely to name it was Operation Abdeel, right? So it was because of this that we had launched Operation Meghdoot. Now, but to understand the context of it, we have to go back into the history, to the year 1949. Now it was in the year 1949 we had signed the Karachi Agreement with Pakistan, and it was this Karachi Agreement under which a ceasefire line was agreed to, right? This ceasefire line later on became line of control as well, and it was also the Shimla Agreement which recognized the same line as line of control, right? So for the map we have to understand from the map, see this red line is basically the line of control between Pakistani occupied Kashmir and Indian territory, right? And this goes up to the point which is called NJ9842, right? This 98 and 42 are nothing but the coordinates of this point, okay? So this point is the last point up to which this LOC is going, after which the LAC is not delineated. Now, it was taking advantage of this situation that LAC is not delineated after this, that Pakistan had tried to alter the status quo. Now let's understand this properly. Now this region, this green line is basically the Saltoro ridge, right? And this was one of the important attraction for the mountaineers, right? Now there were two things. Number one, that mountaineers who wanted to go there, Indian authorities were not giving permission to them, right? So they could not access it from the Indian side, whereas Pakistani authorities were pretty much welcoming of this, and they were providing opportunity to the foreigners who wanted to visit this area, right? And it is also easily accessible from the western side. This Saltoro ridge, if we want to access it from the western side, which is the Pakistani occupied Kashmir, it's easy to access compared to Indian side where the Siachen glacier is present, right? So as a result of this, international media started showing this region as the Pakistan territory, right? Number one thing. Number two thing, that Pakistan also unilaterally changed this position and went beyond this NJ9842 point and redrew this LOC up to the Karakoram Pass, this point. So this point here is the Karakoram Pass, and it extended this LOC from here to here, right? That means incorporating almost 10,000 square kilometers of Indian territory, which also incorporates Siachen Glacier. And they were also planning Operation Abdil to occupy this territory. As a preemptive measure, Indian Army launched Operation Meghdoot, because India actually protested against it, said this is a cartographic aggression of Pakistan, and Pakistan should understand that LOC basically stops here according to Shimla as well as the Karachi Agreement. And we occupied this strategically important Saltoro ridge. This one. Here there are three important passes that India occupied: Siala, Bilafondla and Gyongla, right? So important strategic location. Just try to memorize this thing because it can be an important prelims question for you, right? If you look at the topography of this area, this Saltoro ridge is basically higher in height, right? Whereas Siachen Glacier is at lower height, right? So if you are standing on the western side and inside the Pakistani occupied Kashmir, you will not be able to see anything which is happening on the Siachen Glacier, because the view is obstructed by the Saltoro ridge. But if you have occupied the Saltoro ridge, you can monitor this entire area, both east and west and north, especially this point Indira Col, right? It is basically, you can call it near the tri-junction where India and China and Pakistan meets, right? And from this Indira Col, you can easily monitor this entire Trans-Karakoram track, this Karakoram highway, right? And it is this which is a important problem for Chinese. Why? Because this Karakoram Pass is one of the nodal points which connects the Pakistan with China and China with rest of the region through this area, right? If we see the actual territory of India, Pakistan and China do not share any land borders. It is because of this that Pakistan shares any border with the Chinese, right? So this position of India, where we can easily overlook the Karakoram Pass, alongside the position here where the Daulat Beg Oldie airfield is also there, right, which is just 10 km inside, which is just 10 km away from the Karakoram Pass, are these two important strategic choke points for China, right? Because we can easily cut the connection between Pakistan and China at any moment. And for the China-Pakistan economic corridor or sustenance of this is very important. China also utilizes the Gwadar port in Pakistan, of which access can be cut off from this point, right? China wants to have a direct gas pipeline from Iran to western province of Xinjiang, which can also be cut off by India, right? So from Chinese strategic point of view, this is very, very important for them, right? Okay, now we'll come to the another importance of Siachen Glacier. You can see this Nubra River. Now this Nubra River emerges from the melting water of the Siachen Glacier, which ultimately joins the Shyok River, which forms the tributary of Indus rivers. So it is also a very important source of fresh water that is very important for India, right? So it's also because of this region that India had occupy the Siachen Glacier. All right. Now we have discussed Operation Meghdoot, importance of Saltoro Ridge. Now we will also discuss some of the important implications of Depsang, Y Junction, and most importantly the Shaksgam Valley, right? Okay, so we know that in 1962 India and China went for war, right? China occupied this Aksai Chin region, which is Indian territory, right? And importantly, immediately after that 1962, China also signed agreements with Pakistan, under which Pakistan ceded this Shaksgam Valley to the China, right? Now Shaksgam Valley is very, very important. Now its importance in the current geopolitical scenario is more than at that time. Why? Because this valley is source of 242 glaciers. Now this makes this valley basically the highest glaciated place after the North and the South Pole, and it is because of this it is also a very important source of fresh water, right? Now importance of fresh water nowadays has increased more, because especially for China, because in the larger geopolitics, if we see, China wants to have a absolute control over the semiconductor technology, where they want to have a control from raw material to the manufacturing stage, right? Now, if you want to manufacture a semiconductor, what is important for you is that you have to have access to fresh water, right? Second thing, you also have to have access to sand. These two are very important raw materials which goes into the manufacturing of semiconductors. That's number one thing. Number two thing, you might be saying that why would China then, just for the purpose of fresh water, wants this important strategic location? Because China has so many rivers, Yellow River, Yangtze River, etc., right? But those rivers are polluted and they do not have the kind of water, quality water, that is required for this process, right? And for the manufacture of semiconductor wafer, we can see that for 37 centimeter, you can require 10,000 liters of the fresh water, right? And it is for this purpose, if China wants dominance over this process, it needs ample resources of fresh water which can come from these glaciers. And it is for this reason that in the Xinjiang province, in Taklamakan desert, China is actually envisaging world's largest polysilicon facility, right? So it is also in this context that we have to see, because semiconductors are going to be very, very important source for not just China's geopolitical influence, but also the larger Cold War rivalry which is going between China and United States. Now, why it is important, just understand it by two examples. Number one is that there was a time when USS Zumwalt, which was a basically guided missile destroyer of United States, its propulsion system basically malfunctioned, and it is because of this the investigation found that the propulsion system was running on the electronics which was for semiconductors, which was sourced from the China, right? So basically, if China continues to dominate semiconductor thing, then those semiconductors might be utilized by the US military also for its defense equipment. And China is known to leave backdoors into those semiconductors, which can then be easily infected with viruses, right? So China can virtually block or neutralize the entire US Navy just by a click of mouse, right? So it is that much dangerous for US, right? If it can stop or block the propulsion system of a guided missile destroyer, then it can do even more harm. Second important thing, that US also depends for its electronics on TSMC, which is a Taiwanese company. For example, its F-35 Lockheed Martin made F-35 aircraft is actually sourcing electronics and component for avionics of it from Taiwan's TSMC. Now, China eyes Taiwan. China wants to occupy Taiwan. So it is for this reason, it is also called Taiwan's semiconductor industry is also called Taiwan's silicon shield, right? Because it is this strategic importance of Taiwan which does not allow it does not allow China to invade Taiwan, because if China invades Taiwan, then USA will have to come to the rescue of Taiwan, right? So even though Taiwan is not as strong compared to China, still China cannot dare to invade, because USA's internal security and national security is very intimately linked to the security of Taiwan. So that means it is because of the important emerging good called semiconductor, which is basically protecting Taiwan from Chinese invasion. This is why it is also called Taiwan's silicon shield, right? So now you can understand the larger geopolitics under which this smaller area will also fall, right? So we should not try and see this development only from the narrow lens of India, China, India, Pakistan. It is the broader horizon that we have to expand and try and understand this thing, because that is what going to help us write very good analytical answers into it, and we can also give the larger picture to the examiner, right? Okay, so now we'll come to another important geostrategic location, which we called Y junction. This is also known as bottleneck. Now this Y junction is very important, because see, if you want to access this important point called Daulat Beg Oldie here, right? Now to access this, the only highway from the Indian side is Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie, right? So it comes from here. It reaches up to the Daulat Beg Oldie, which is just 10 kilometers away from the Karakoram Pass, right? Now China do not want India to build this highway, right? So what China is doing, it has come over Galwan, right? And it has also blocked India's access to various patrolling point 10, 11, etc. because it has an eye over Y junction. Now why Y junction? Because once they occupy this Y junction, they can block or cut off India's access to this important Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie highway, right? Because it is just 7 kilometers away from this highway, right? The moment they occupy this Y junction, they can cut off from this particular important highway, right? So China have many ways to access this location. India has only one way to access this. The moment it is cut off, our access to Daulat Beg Oldie will be cut off, right? Which is a very important location for us. Now China, by blocking India's access to these patrolling point, it is called Y junction because it is in the Y shape, right? You can see this left hand side is Raki Nala, and then there are various patrol points. So if it can connect petrol point 10 with petrol point 30 alongside Y junction, it will block India's access to these areas, and it will also cut off India from the Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie highway, right? So its control over these Depsang plain, then this is Depsang plain, in this map you can get more clarity. Somewhere here, right here, Depsang Plain, which basically will also squeeze India between China and Pakistan. So China on east occupying the Depsang Plain and Pakistan on west. So this Siachen glacier which we have occupied, which is very important strategic point, also having this Indira coal there, this will be squeezed between from the east China and from the west Pakistan. So anytime this important place can become vulnerable for the attack from two sides, right? And therefore India do not want this to happen. So now you understand why Chinese have brought in so many forces here, because of the strategic location involved and the long-term stakes also of China is involved, number one. And this Siachen glacier is a strategic node where India can monitor the location, where India can also cut the important choke point of China, which connects between China and Pakistan. And it is for these important reasons that the Chinese are doing, or Chinese are behaving the way they are behaving, right? So recently India successfully tested the new generation nuclear capable Agni-Prime missiles. Now this is a important Agni series missile which is part of India's integrated guided missile development program, right? So first of all, this is an improvement over the Agni series of missiles, Agni 1, Agni 2, Agni 3, Agni 4, 5, etc. Right? So this is an improved version of them. How it is improved version, we will see. But first of all, it was tested by Strategic Forces Command and DRDO. Now, something about Strategic Forces Command. That Strategic Forces Command actually handles India's nuclear weapons also. Now, when it comes to India's nuclear weapon, then we have to understand very important thing. Now, there is something called Nuclear Command Authority, right? NCA. This Nuclear Command Authority is the one which can actually authorize use of nuclear weapon, right? And this Strategic Forces Command which handles them, which will then be responsible to executing the orders. Okay. Now this NCA has two things. Number one, it has a political council, right? Second, it has an executive council. This political council will be chaired by Prime Minister of India, and it is this political council from where the authorization for the uses of nuclear weapon can come. This executive council will be headed by the National Security Advisor, and its job will be to give the intelligence input and the information on the basis of which the decisions can be making. Its job will also be about executing or implementing the decision taken by the National Command Authority, right? So this is the important piece of information that we have to know first of all. Now we will come to the India's integrated guided missile development program, which was started in 1982. Now there are 5 missiles in this. You can memorize it from this acronym called PATNA. So P stands for Prithvi missile, A stands for Akash missile, T for Trishul, A for Agni, and N for Nag missile, right? So you can read it as PATNA, P-A-T-N-A. Okay. Now this Nag missile is basically the anti-tank guided missile. Okay. It's an anti-tank guided missile. This Prithvi missile, as the name also shows, it's a ballistic missile and it is surface to surface, right? Akash missile will be surface to air, and it's an air defense missile. Same goes with the Trishul missile system also. Okay, now we'll come to our own topic, which is the Agni-Prime missile. All right, now if you want to analyze any missile, there are few parameters that we have to observe. Fuel, what kind of fuel used in it? What is the range? So range is important. What is the material of it? What is the launch mechanism? Then guidance and navigation system. These are important parameters on the basis of which we will judge the missile. Okay. In terms of fuel, this missile uses the solid fuel. Now, many advanced missiles in the world utilizes the solid fuel, even though liquid fuel missiles are also there, right? But solid fuel missile has a very, very important advantage. It does not involve complex handling procedure which the liquid fuel missiles will have. It can also be launched in a very short duration, whereas liquid fuel missile takes more time. The reason is this, that in the liquid fuel missiles you have to keep the fuel and the oxidizer separately. Before you want to launch, you have to add them to the missile and then you can launch it. Whereas in the solid fuel, what is there? Oxidizer and the fuel are in the powdered form, which you can mix. Then you can after combining, you can roll it inside a rubber and then put into the missile. So you can keep it together, right? So it gives you less handling headache. Liquid fuel is also sometimes be toxic, and it is also sensitive to the environmental conditions, right? So these handling challenges and maintenance issues will also not be there, will be relatively less in case of solid fuel compared to the liquid fuel. So it uses solid fuel, which is a very good thing, and it's that's why it's an advantageous thing. Second thing is range. It will fall in the medium range, which has a range of 1000 to 2000 kilometer, right? It uses the composite material. In terms of material, it uses the composite material. Now this is very, very important. The missile material is very important because missiles go through various kind of stress. So if they're high speed missile, if they're flowing in the atmosphere, they have to withstand the high heat stress, right? The missiles also have to be lightweight as possible, because the lightweight means that they can have more range, they can use less fuel, they will be more efficient, and they can have more payload capacity, right? So weight of the material will also depend the speed, the payload capacity, the range of the missile, and the fuel that is consumed by the missile. And therefore material is very important. Now the utilization of composite material is a significant advantage. The reason is this. See, we can adjust the composite material. This means basically we're mixing two or more kind of material. That is what composite material is, to suit our advantage. Let's take an example. If you want to make a very strong missile, right, which should be able to withstand high heat, but it should also be lighter. So what you will do? You will take up two kind of alloy. One is very strong, other is lighter. So you will mix in such a proportion that the actual third composite material that you will generate will have properties of both. It will also be lightweight and it will also be able to withstand heat, right? So in order to adjust to your requirement, you will utilize this. And as I said, that Agni missile is actually improvement over the earlier version. This Agni-Prime missile I'm talking about, it is improvement over the Agni version. And why I'm saying this? This composite material utilization is also one of the reason. Why? Because this is lightweight and equally solid, because of which the weight of Agni-Prime is basically 50% lesser than the weight of Agni-3. If we compare the missiles of the similar range, the weight of Agni-Prime is 50% lesser than the Agni-3, which cuts down the fuel cost, which enhances the range, which also increases the capacity of payload. So this is why I am calling it is an improvised version of the Agni series of missile. Okay. Now coming to the launch mechanism. This launch mechanism is very important because if we are using in this canisterized launch, okay. Now in this canisterized launch, there are launch tubes in which the payload is preloaded, right? So payload is already loaded in this, right? So payload is loaded in this launch tube. So it do very important functions. Number one, that it basically allows the missiles batteries to be kept at any place. So it makes it mobile. When it is mobile, it is difficult for the enemy to locate its position. You can take it to any place and launch it from there, right? Second important thing, it also allows low handling issues. The damage that can be done to the missile because of the handling will also be lesser, because one is fuel, its fuel is solid, other is it is preloaded. These two things will minimize the damage that can come as a result of handling. Its maintenance will also be lesser. Since it is inside a launching tube, it will also be insulated from the environmental stresses, humidity, dust, etc., which can also be damaging to the missile. So therefore, it can be kept for a longer duration, which is very important. Second thing, the time taken to launch a missile is also very important in a war, right? If you take more time to respond, the damage the enemy can inflict on you is larger. And this canisterized launch also enables to shoot the missile in a lesser time, right? So time taken to shoot the missile will also be less. And these are the important factors which makes this missile very, very lethal. Now we will come to the navigation and the guidance system. So for the navigation and guidance, it uses dual, redundant guidance and navigation system. Now dual redundant means if it will carry the sensors and electronics part in two parallel chains, right? So one will perform exact the same function as other electronic components will also perform. These will be two parallel ones. The reason why carrying for two or more parallel circuitry is this, that if one become redundant, is not able to function properly, other will take care of the thing, right? So this is what the dual redundant will give the advantage to. It also enhances the precision. Understand this, very important. Any missile system, if it cannot target with precision, then we don't have any meaning of launching that missile or having that missile. So precision is very important. For that, the sensors and the guidance system and the electronics and avionics have to work properly. And this is why this dual redundant navigation and guidance system is a very, very important improvisation, right? So that's all in this topic. So looking into this topic, Army's induction of indigenous Akash Tir system. Now this is a very important development for Army because it is first of all related to the air defense, right? Now this is a control and reporting system which will help India to automate air defense. Now why there is a need to automate air defense, that we will see with an example. Now Indian Air Force conducted the strikes into the Pakistan, which is also known as Balakot strikes. In anticipation of Pakistan's retaliation against India, we had kept our air defenses at a very high alert. Now, in the process, what happened is that we had shot down our own Mi-17 helicopter, in which our own 6 personnel got killed. Now, this was a mistake which happened as a result of the human-induced error. Right? So after that, we had realized that we had to try and automate the process so that the human related errors in which we are killing our own people, that means air defense is a very, very complex task in which we not only have to identify the enemy or the foe, but we also have to identify the friendly aircraft, because when in the air encounter, it is not always that the enemy aircrafts will be surrounding us. It can also be the friendly aircraft. So if we are not able to distinguish or discriminate between enemy and the friend, we will end up actually shooting down our own planes, as happened in the case of Mi-17, right? So this is to ensure that these kind of fratricides are not happening, or what we also call friendly fires are not happening, that this air defense automation drive has been started, and this has been inducted by the army. Okay, now this basically not only automate the air defense, it also enhances the situational awareness of the army, right? Because the signals will be transmitted. See, we are integrating the radar and communication, right? So integration of radar and communication is very important for situational awareness. Understand this with this example, that radar is basically there to detect or locate, right? It does not communicate, right? Communication system is separate. Now once we have located something, we also have to communicate. Now when these are two systems, it can lead to lag, right? If we are integrating, the detection and communication can happen simultaneously, and this will enhance our situational awareness by unifying these two aspects, right? And it will also enable the swift response, because it will not lead to any time delays and lags, right? Air defense is all about responding in time. If you are not able to respond on time, the enemy will hit you first, right? So it's very, very important, and this is the important significance of it. Second thing is that it is also having mobile control systems, right? Because enemy can take down, to neutralize your air defense, enemy can try and take down your control systems themselves, right? But if your control systems are not fixed but mobile, you can move them to actually deceive your enemy, then it is very difficult for your enemy to basically locate the systems and then neutralize them. So having mobile control systems is very important. Also, even in the adversarial situations, mobile control systems will enable communication, right? There can be situation or circumstances where, or area where communication is not possible because of the non-availability of the networks, right? So mobility also enhances this aspect of communication. Okay, now what it wants to achieve, the important thing is that air defense has to, as I said, it's a very complex thing. So first of all, we have to clearly discriminate between friend and foe. By enhancing the situational awareness, it will do this. It will also neutralize the human induced error by automating the process, right? Another thing that it will make for the swift response. As I said, that making the swift response is very important, otherwise enemy will hit you first, right? So these are the 3-4 important things that we have to keep in mind when it comes to the Akash Tir air defense system. So some good news for India's air defense exports, which has touched all-time high, right? If we see the data released by the government, which says that around 21,000 crores worth of exports have been made only in one year, single year, 2023 and 24, right? It's a very, very important news for the India's defense defense sector, because the government of India has been focusing and emphasizing too much on indigenization, for which it launched very important reforms in the defense for the defense sector and development of the defense industry in India under the Make in India or Atmanirbhar initiative, right? So reaching this milestone is very, very important. But the problem is this, that despite we have achieved the highest ever personal exports for defense, we are still the biggest arms importer in the world, right? So that is also the concern for us. Now, first of all, we'll look at the first part of it. So if we see, compared to the last year, this 21,000 crore worth of defense exports actually amounts to a growth of 32.5%, which is a very significant year-on-year growth, right? Another important thing, that despite having achieving our best in terms of defense exports, we are still nowhere in the picture in terms of largest defense exporters in the world. USA still dominates with 42%, and even China has 5.8% share in the overall defense exports in the world, and we are nowhere in the picture in this, right? So even though it is an individual best, you have to realize that in terms of overall defense exports in the world, we are still far behind the other countries in the world. Okay, now what is biggest takeaway from this development for us is this, that government of India has been emphasizing or incentivizing the private sector a lot, right? So far, the inefficient defense sector was the important one, right, as far as the defense production in the country was concerned. But if you look at the share of private versus the defense public sector units, it is the private sector which dominates the defense exports, which has a share of 60% in the overall defense exports compared to the public sector, right? So it's a very, very remarkable achievement for us, because we want to incentivize the private sector. It is this private sector which can bring about the cutting edge technology, and also it can fast pace the production processes in our country, right? So that's why it's very important. If we see the global player, mostly the private sector players are there. Okay. Second important thing important takeaway from it is that the defense exports must also be acceptable globally. That means until unless you're producing world class, your defense equipments will not be bought or purchased, right? So you have to produce the world class equipments also. So if this exports are rising, that also indicates that the exports that we are giving has global acceptability, right? So this is very, very important point here, right? Now, what are the measures that the government of India had took to boost the indigenous defense manufacturing in India? First of all, we have provided for the positive indigenization list. What does that mean? Now, any equipment or article that is placed inside this positive indigenization list must be procured from the domestic manufacturers only, right? So imports are not allowed for those articles, right? And over 4,000 articles have already been put into this list by the government, right? So that is also one of the way to incentivize the private sector and the indigenous defense producers to basically produce, because they get an assurance that their produced defense equipments, if meet the quality requirements of the army, will definitely be procured, right? So this is a very important step taken by the government of India, which has provided the dividends for us. Second thing is that inside the overall capital acquisition budget that the government has for the defense, 75% is for the indigenously produced goods, right? So this is also the one which boosted the indigenous defense capabilities. Now, for export, you have to have indigenous defense capabilities in terms of production. And it is these steps which have developed the indigenous defense production industries in India, which could actually be then leveraged to enhance the exports. And it is these policies which has shown the result. Now, despite this, we still are the largest importer in the world. And what is the reason that why are we largest importer? If we see the Chinese imports have been declining, whereas India's imports have been increasing, right? That is a major concern for us. So let us look at the reasons for this. First of all, our strategic partnership model could not take off properly because the government have identified some projects in which strategic partners have been identified, which are original equipment manufacturers, which will then partner with Indian manufacturing company to produce certain identified defense equipments, right? Now, this could not take off properly, right? So this is one problem. Second is the FDI. Now FDI we have allowed under automatic route in defense sector up to 74%. Even with the government approval route, we have allowed up to 100%, right? And despite that, not significant amount of FDI is coming into the defense sector, which is a policy concern for the government of India, which needs that which actually shows that we need to enhance more on the policy reform side, right? Third important thing is more about geopolitics. Now recently the conflict with Pakistan and China have indicated to the government, especially post Galwan clash, that we had to go for the emergency purchases, right? So it is this geostrategic environment and this hostile environment that India is constantly in, that we are sometimes forced to actually meet our immediate needs, because of which we have to make the emergency purchases, right? So it is also in this context that we have to see that why our overall exports are increasing, but despite that we remains the biggest arms importer in the world. So in the topic of all-weather road gives a strategic fillip to Ladakh, what is important for us to understand is that Ladakh is a very sparsely populated state. And being sparsely populated state and also the border state with China, it can give advantage for China to occupy those territories along the border where population is either negligible or non-existing, right? So thinning of population is a concern as far as the states, border states like Ladakh is concerned. And this is for the purpose that Government of India wants to develop the border areas, right? And for the development of the border areas, infrastructure is very, very important. Connectivity is important. There are other ways also which are part of other Government of India's initiative, but we'll restrict our focus to this particular development. So that is one thing, that we have to reverse the migration, right? And for that, we have to build the infrastructure. And building a all-weather road is an important milestone in this regard. Second thing that we have to understand in this is that this road, which is all-weather road, that means it will be working even in the freezing environment, right? So where normally the connectivity cuts, this area cuts away with the rest of the India when the heavy snowfall is there, this road will be even functioning then, right? It gives us very, very important advantages. Obviously, it is good for the people living there. It gives them more development, etc. But it is also a dual purpose infrastructure. That means apart from civilian, it can also be used for the military purposes. Now, what military advantage will it give? Number one, that it can, with the black topping, be used by the fighter aircraft also to fly, right? Number two is that military personnel actually have to carry a lot of stuffs with them so that they can survive in harsh conditions. Now those supplies will cut off if the winters are there, right? So they have to carry those supplies in advance, right? And also if we have to militarily faster, we have to deploy our personnel. That is also something which is significantly reduced when the weather is harsh or the condition is harsh. So these kind of strategic dual purpose role will allow the faster deployment of military personnel, mobilization of military in terms of hours of crisis, but it will also make sure that we don't have to keep the arms, ammunition and the other supply things in advance at certain places, right? So that is another important thing. Now, particularly if I talk about this particular highway, which is Nimmu, Padum and Darcha highway, it basically connects Manali with Leh, right? And it is, we can say it is the third axis, right? There are other highways also which reaches up to Leh, right? So there is Manali Leh highway and there is Srinagar Leh highway also, right? So it is the third axis. Now what is good thing about is that out of all other axes, this one is basically the shortest one, right? So that means we can deploy military in a short possible time through this. Number two is that it crosses only one pass, right? So That pass is also Shinkunla. There also we are building a all-weather tunnel, and the tunnel we are building will also be able to withstand any missile attack on it, right? So that is also very, very important thing that we have to understand from the defense point of view. Okay, so as I said, this is also a dual purpose infrastructure, and civilian purpose. It will help arrest or help reduce the thinning of population in the border areas, because we want to populate the border areas rather than let the population flow out of it. Even Chinese, if we see the Chinese side, they are going up with the plan for the border villages. They are creating out of artificial villages at the borders, making the people to move from hinterland Chinese to the border areas, right? So we also we cannot afford to lag behind. The kind of behavior that Chinese have been doing in the last 5-10 years, we cannot afford to neglect this thing. And that's why recently the government have actually went on for a lot of infrastructure development projects, especially in Ladakh, right? So it is in this context we should try and understand this. So recently, a report from SIPRI, this is Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, have highlighted that India is the 4th largest military spender in the year 2023 in the whole world, right? It put the India's total expenditure in 2023 to be $83.6 billion. Now, India is the 4th largest. That means there has to be other 3 largest. So first largest is United States of America. Compare India's expenditure with the United States of America's annual expenditure, military expenditure. So America's military expenditure is $916 billion. So it is more than 9 times the India's military expenditure. So you can see the military gap between the two countries. Even the Chinese military expenditure on $296 billion, compared to India, it is also about 4 times, right? But if we compare the gap between USA and China, it's roughly about 3 times, right? So it's important to see it comparatively, because in the international politics, we are worried about the relative power, right? We do not see power in the absolute terms. If we say USA is a hegemon, then we say it because relatively it is more powerful than the other countries of the world, right? So relatively, in international relation, relative power is the more important thing, right? So military expenditure is one of the means to see or judge a country in the relative power terms. Obviously, with the evolution of more theories where we are talking about comprehensive national powers nowadays, right, which incorporates our other things also, incorporating the soft power elements also, right? But from the hard military power sense, we will say that it's a good indicator to judge the relative power. Okay. Now, if we further break it down, then we will see that majority of our expenditure that we are doing, around 80% of it, is going into the expenditure related to the personals and the operation cost, right? So this is a worrying sign of India, because revenue expenditure in the overall military budget is very important, very high, which is 80%, right? So it leaves little for the capital expenditure, where we can acquire some cutting edge defense technology. So it leaves very little for it, which is why that this is a very important concern for the government also. Now, if we have to talk about, there is some good news also in this. Out of the 22% of the capital expenditure we are doing in the total budget, military expenditure, 75% we are allocating for the indigenous defense procurement, right? So as I've discussed in the earlier article also in this particular discussion, that we have something called positive indigenization list, right? So it is for this purpose that we are putting certain articles into this list, which we will only procure from the domestic manufacturers, right? So it is alongside the capital outlays, this positive indigenization list, and self-reliance and make in India, you have to see in synchronization, right? Now, India is also the largest arms importer in the world, right? We have also seen that. So being highest military spender, we are also one of the highest military spender, but we are also the largest military spender, a military importer, right? So there are some reasons for it, right? That FDI, as I discussed in the earlier article also, that we are not able to attract sufficient FDI despite relaxing the FDI norms. Like we have allowed 74% of the FDI in defense sector through the automatic route and up to 100% through the government approval route. So despite that, we are not receiving sufficient FDI. So our dependence on imports are very high. We have also seen the emergency purchase angle and the not yet taken off strategic partnership, right? Now what we have to understand here also, that if we have to see the Chinese export, then here Chinese exports especially to our two countries of our very important concern. One is Pakistan, other is Bangladesh. Pakistan is an enemy country, and to enemy countries, Chinese exports of its total overall exports is 61%. Whereas for our friendly country, Chinese exports are around 11%, which is Bangladesh, right? So to Bangladesh also, China's exports are very high. Now this is also a concern for us because Bangladeshi dependence on the Chinese for the purpose of defense is a very important threat for us, because it will leave less room for the strategic autonomy of Bangladesh. Now Bangladesh foreign policy might be dictated by the Chinese, which can go against our interest, which is why it's not a good sign for us, right? And this is in the sense we have to analyze the military data, because when we see this data, ultimate purpose is to write good answers in the examination, and it is this data which will help us frame the arguments in the examination. When we talk about balance of power, we can use the angle of relative power in which we can quote this data. When we talk about strategic autonomy, we can use this data that Chinese exports to Bangladesh is around 11%, and it is because of this dependence Bangladesh's strategic autonomy for their foreign policy might be compromised, which is a security concern for us. If Bangladesh ends up using the military radars produced by the Chinese or equipments which have Chinese chips, then it can also monitor where the Indian military deployments are, where we are deploying our missile systems, etc., right? So it can also monitor our movements, which is again a very important defense and security threat for us. So that's all from my sides in this discussions. Thanks for watching.